Why isn't having gender dysphoria considered a mental illness? It is mental illness. The only reason people fight against it being mental illness is because they assume mental illness means bad, or it's something to be ashamed of. I wouldn't put down someone who has depression, or OCD, or schizophrenia, you know? All you can do is identify what the problem is, and then learn how to cope with it. People with gender dysphoria either learn how to live with it day to day and reaffirm their thoughts into reality, or they transition in order to alleviate the dysphoria if it's super bad. Destigmatizing mental illness is very important. Some people still consider as such. But the larger point, even if it is, what do we tend to do about mental illness? We treat it. We treat it with a treatment that ensures the most positive outcome. So you either have transition or conversion therapy. At least, in the cases that would warrant either approach. Conversion therapy is barbaric, though. I guess it all depends on whether or not you want the patient to have a positive outcome. In your example, your distress is a symptom of a deeper condition. Missing legs. With gender dysphoria, it is also a symptom of a deeper condition. The problem isn't whether it is or is not a diagnosable disorder. The problem is that it is a symptom, but it's often being treated as a condition. You cannot cure the distress of missing legs by ignoring the fact that the problem is the missing legs, not the distress. A lot of people here are saying that the DSM-5 says it is a mental illness. But that isn't true. It used to be called gender identity disorder and was classified as a mental illness. It was changed in 2013 to gender dysphoria and moved into its own category in response to stigmatization. People used to equate gender identity disorder being a mental illness with being transgender being a mental illness, which it isn't. So they thought that declassified it as a disorder would help with that. It has kind of backfired though, because a lot of insurance companies now consider gender affirmation surgery as cosmetic rather than medical treatment and don't cover it. The short version is it was reclassified to combat the stigmatization of trans people. As a trans guy with gender dysphoria, I consider it a mental illness. I seek treatment for it the same as with something like depression or anxiety. The difference is that the treatment isn't a pill. It's transitioning. It is indeed considered a mental illness. It actually is. I'm not too familiar with the subject, but thus far, it seems gender transitioning is the best known treatment if all other options have been exhausted. I get what you're saying. And I'm cis, so any trans people correct me if I'm wrong. I always thought that the dysphoria was caused by someone knowing they're the opposite gender. Always feeling like the opposite gender. But they have to act as if they're their gender assigned at birth. At least until they're able to transition safely. So they experience dysphoria due to socially and medically living as a gender they know they're not. It would be like if I, a woman, had to live as a man for whatever reason. If I had to have facial hair, wear masculine clothing, do more typically masculine things, but no, I'm a woman. My brain would probably be extremely uncomfortable with knowing everybody is treating me as if I'm a man, along with me living as if I'm a man. And I'd feel dysphoria. Man, I've been saying this for years and get hate every time I do. As someone with a list of mental illnesses, it's okay to admit that you have a mental illness. And body dysmorphia is definitely one of them. It is defined as a mental illness in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. I expect activists are trying to get this changed. Some people only like to follow the science when it aligns with their beliefs.
It is.
People have made gender a binary issue. So it follows that if your brain and your sexual preference don't match your physical attributes, the pressure to make them match will be greater. Hence gender dysphoria. They don't always match in nature, and we have outlawed euthanizing infants and children to weed out the naturally gender dysphoric. So it's simply a thing that will always be there. Solution? Stop caring about who likes whom, and stay out of people's sex lives. Problem solved. Now can we just enjoy the gay penguins for once? P.S. Being differently configured isn't a mental illness. The mental illness is what we create when we pretend things fit into a neat little box. It actually is considered a mental illness.
It is.
It is.
It is literally a mental illness, lol. It's in the DSM-V. It still is in a lot of places. When referring to something as an illness, usually there is an implication of something keeping a person from functioning normally, ergo not being able to contribute their part to society. For example, if you've got a pneumonia, you'd probably best stay home and not go to work, school, do your hobbies, whatever, because you're really not physically up for it. I've got the impression that for mental illnesses similar parameters apply. Certain conditions can just render people incapable of taking part in their society in the same way people without those conditions are able to take part. Often that means that mentally ill people are immediately met with infantilization, being treated as though they are less deserving, not capable of thinking for themselves, etc. It can get outright horrible. Often people are considered useless. The thing is, number 1, not all mental illnesses are the same. Most exist on a spectrum, and number 2, by far not all of them render people useless in any way or form, but that's what your average person will think of when they hear someone's mentally ill. Oh, okay, so they can't work, take care of themselves, etc. But if you're trans, you're just as much of a normal person as everyone else. You're just as capable or incapable of taking part in normal activities as everyone else. Yes, it's stupid brain stuff. But no, the not functioning normally part of being ill is not really relevant. Especially if the preferred treatment, be that socially or medically, can be provided and accepted. There's 2 problems I have with using the term mental illness for being trans. Other people seeing trans people as less valuable and treating them according to the value they assign to trans people, and trans people themselves adopting that same viewpoint and harming themselves for the implied unworthiness. In the long run, viewing being trans as a mental illness might be technically correct. I cannot make any statements about that, but the actual harm done to people and the harm they inflict on themselves because of this treatment by others when they're already wanting to harm the parts of themselves they perceive as being wrong. In many cases, not all, this is not universal, is just not worth it, at least in a societal context. Friends, family, hobby, work, wherever it may come up, I'd say you are willingly and probably knowingly working towards destroying a person a bit if you tell them, hey, I think you and everyone who's got the same thing going on is mentally ill. This is why I would like to see a change in the medical context as well. People are trying to seek help from therapists, doctors, and it's honestly just really undignifying to go through that entire process. Broadly speaking, I'd also not classify wanting to have boobies, get rid of them, and being addressed and referred to with correct pronouns in the same category as wanting to cut your leg off. But that's more of an intuitive thought. I'd encourage you to do some research in how different countries handle being trans, gender dysphoria, and being mentally ill. Usually there are actual judicial verdicts that explain why being trans is or is not classified as a mental illness in this or that country. The same way homosexuality is being declassified as a mental illness. SRY. I know, this is very long. And I'm also not a native speaker. SRY if I've phrased things in a weird way. But I thought if you're actually interested, it's better that way than just having a bunch if people reply, well actually it is. Ha ha ha, I am so funny and insightful. Gender dysphoria is often thought of as a mental illness. However, being transgender isn't. A lot of people think transgender equals gender dysphoria. Hence the attitudes around calling it a mental illness. But those people don't realize you don't need dysphoria to be trans. Someone who is perfectly content with their body as it is still a valid transgender person. Sorts by controversial or a birth defect. It's a question worth asking.
If you enjoyed this video, please check out our playlists full of similar content. TooAfraidToAsk is like doom scrolling for your ears. Please like, share, and subscribe.